I'm joined right now by Democratic Congressman Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, who's on the House Intelligence Committee. Joyce Vance is a former U.S. attorney who's prosecuted public corruption cases. Yamiche Alcindor is the White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Katrina Mulligan has held senior positions at the DOJ, NSC, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Let me start with the Congressman. Star witness today, a witness to the conversation. What more do we need?
Well, you're right. He's a very compelling witness. He's credible. He's a Purple Heart awardee, and he's dedicated his life to service of our country. And he's risking his career by coming before us to testify about the wrongdoing that he witnessed. And as you saw in his opening statement, he was very specific. And I found him to be, as I said, very credible today. Another in a string of career public servants who are coming forward, who are apolitical with evidence of wrongdoing.
How does he confirm the wrongdoing aspect? How does he confirm the wrongness of Trump's shaking down a foreign leader for dirt on a political opponent?
Well, as you said earlier, he was actually a witness to the phone call. He was actually a participant on the phone call, but he was also a participant in conversations surrounding the phone call. And so you pointed out in his opening statement, he talked about a July 10th meeting at the White House where Mr. Volker, Ambassador Sondland, Rick Perry, as well as John Bolton, Fiona Hill, and others were present with the Ukrainians, where Ambassador Sondland said, according to his opening statement, that in order to get a White House meeting, you have to deliver certain investigations. And these are bogus investigations, but they're investigations to benefit the president politically here in the United States for his re-election. That's wrong.
Well, the last point I heard, and maybe the biggest one, is he used the word demand. He said that the president, in the phone call of July 25th with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, he heard the president demand, that was his verb, demand dirt on Joe Biden. How do you take
Correct.
that? I don't know if you're allowed to divulge that or not, but it may have been in his opening statement.
It was in his opening statement. I think that what I would say is, first of all, you don't need a quid pro quo for that alone to be illegal. Pressuring or even requesting foreign assistance to participate or to help in domestic re-election effort is illegal. That being said, he did use words in the call transcript that would also suggest a quid pro quo. And, of course, that's illegal as well. So Mr. Vindman, Colonel Vindman, was a first-party participant to the call and could speak directly about what was said and what were the atmospherics for the call.
Katrina, I want you to come in here and talk about the atmospherics. You're in the NSC staff. You've been working in that world your career. You're all through that world. Here's an officer of the U.S. military.
That's right.
Assigned to the NSC staff.
That's right.
He's listening in on the phone call. He hears something he thinks is really wrong by the president of the United States, all the way up the chain of command to the top, commander-in-chief. And he calls up the counsel to the NSC and says, this is wrong. What's that like to do that?
Well, there are a couple of things that come to mind. First, that is not an easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to go to the NSC legal advisor and report allegations, report the president of the United States. One of the key questions that I have is, what did the counsel do? I mean, here you have lawyers, you know, I'm a lawyer, and we're notorious for taking meticulous notes, for documenting everything we do, certainly in a situation like this. So one of the questions that I have is what documentation did he make of the complaint that he received, which, again, wasn't just one complaint. There were two. There was a complaint after that initial July meeting.
And the whistleblower, whoever that is, also got that word.
That's right. And we also know that Fiona Hill raised concerns. So what did the NSC counsel, Eisenberg, what did he do? And to the extent that he doesn't have records, why not?
Well, then he's a toady. Okay, let me go the great thing. I love television because we could show all those toadies out there, you know, starting and ending with Lindsey Graham, all saying about you don't have an eyewitness. And then we have an eyewitness. So all that stuff, you can't, in other words, they're basing all their game on you can't trust a whistleblower because it might be an anti-Trumper or something. And now we've got a witness to the actual conversation who complained about it in real time. Doesn't that just vitiate, doesn't it knock all that stuff off the table as relevant?
It certainly looks that way. You have now this lieutenant colonel who describes himself as getting a Purple Heart because he was serving his country and attacked and wounded in an IND. This is someone who understands serving your country. He's coming to the United States to say, look, I had a real problem with this, and I went to this person twice, and I heard this call and immediately thought, this is not what we do. This is not in the national security interests of the United States. So I think what you have is Republicans really throwing a lot of things at the wall and hoping something will stick. You had them first saying that the whistleblower was only a secondhand account. You then, before that, had them saying the president never pressured Ukraine. The call came out. Then they said, well, maybe Ukraine didn't actually know what we were doing when we were holding up that money. The reporting is that Ukraine understood from the very beginning why this military aid was going to be held up. So I think what Republicans are doing now is really saying, what else can we do to try to show the president that we're loyal to him? Because the president is saying, look, Republicans, you need to be stronger. But this is all in some ways really falling apart because we're seeing witness after witness now come forward and really make the claim that this was wrong.
Joyce, as a U.S. attorney, you're familiar with opiates cases and drug cases. This has been called a drug deal. This is a deal operated outside the United States government, basically by the three amigos, Volker and Perry, and this guy Sondland, who was he paid for his ambassadorship to the EU. He was one of those guys. And now we find out that they had these meetings beforehand. We know what it was set up to be. This is all about squeezing or shaking down this Ukrainian president. We've got now a voice, basically recording of it by this lieutenant colonel who is listening in on it, and he can verify the whole conversation. In fact, real-time evidence that he complained about it, went to his higher-ups, to the attorney, the counsel for the NSC, to complain about it. What more do you need in a court of law to say that Donald Trump is impeachable?
I think when Lieutenant Colonel Vindman testifies publicly, when the country can hear from Vindman, it will be one of those compelling moments where the country will come to a stop and people will be watching his testimony from TVs all over the country. One of the problems Democrats have faced up until now is that a large part of the country has simply ignored the narrative. It hasn't touched close enough to home. But hearing this decorated military veteran tell his story, a really active duty service member, tell his story will be compelling. He will be credible. He is a firsthand witness. You ask what more do investigators need to bring this case home and point out that the president should be impeached? One thing that I would caution against is cutting off investigation too early. It's always a delicate balance, right? There's always a rush to the finish line, but you have to make sure that you're thorough. You have to make sure that you understand all of the criminal, or in this case, abusive conduct that took place. You don't want to miss key witnesses. You, in fact, want to be fair to the person that you're investigating and ensure you get their full story. So this isn't something that can come to a conclusion in 30 days. I think it inevitably has to go after the first of the year. But at this point, we know the story, and it's a question of presenting it.
You think that they will not vote? They will not vote on articles of impeachment till the election year, presidential election year?
No, I suspect that they'll vote on articles of impeachment before the end of the year, Chris. I don't think that we'll see a trial in the Senate before the close of the year.
I agree with that. I'm just hoping we get the big baby behind us because I think this thing's hot. Let me go to the congressman about this question. For weeks, not just days, but weeks, we talked about the authenticity and the completeness of the transcript, if you will, the summary of that conversation, which will be at the heart of this whole case. How good is the summary from what you heard from the testimony by Colonel Vindman today?
I can't comment on the specifics of the testimony. However, I think it's fair to say that there are more questions about the transcript, and there's also questions about, why it was stored on the server in the way that it was stored. And I think that at this point, we'll continue to ask questions about what is potentially a cover-up of the underlying evidence.
Okay. Let's talk about that, because you've got some reporting on that. But what we heard from Lieutenant Colonel Vindman today from the NSC, he's a military man, he said the Burisma was in his notes. He wrote down that there was the reference to the company that Hunter Biden is working for at the time as a consultant or as a board member was actually mentioned in the conversation by the president with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. But it did not appear, that word. The word company showed up, apparently, or corporation or whatever, but not the name of it. So that perhaps there were some gaps, some liberties taken in the note-taking. What do you have to report on that in the transcript?
Well, it's important to remember that it's not an actual transcript. It's a memorandum of conversation.
Is it honest?
And I think that one of the things that we're hearing as the rumors start to get out about what happened during today's testimony is that there may be daylight between his contemporaneous notes, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman's, and the call memo that was ultimately released by the White House. And I think it'll be up to investigators to go back and to try to figure out exactly what made it into that call memorandum and what may not have.
Who in the works over there at NSC or in the sit room would have the power to clean up the president's crap? Who would be able to say, we better not say Burisma because that really looks political? Yamiche, who has the clout? I know on the Hill you can fix member speech because I used to do it. You could fix them afterwards, make the syntax right, help the grammar, help the sentences parse. You could do that. But you weren't supposed to take out reality.
I mean, I think it's in some ways speculation because it's really about who has access to that memo. I agree with you. It's not a transcript, and it says that very clearly that it's not a transcript. I will say in my conversations with White House officials today, a senior official told me he finds Vindman credible. So my question to them was, we have allies of the president calling this person a spy, saying that President Trump says he doesn't know who this person is. He's a never-Trumper. People inside the White House are saying, look, this is someone who we respect. This is someone who's credible. And I think that you have to look at that when you think about the daylight between his notes and this memo. There's this fact that the White House is very cautious about attacking someone who literally has a Purple Heart for saving this country.
Do we trust the alterations in that transcript done by the White House people?
I think we have to figure out whether or not there's going to be daylight there.
Yeah. Well, if your rumors, as you call them, which will become reporting by around 6:30 tonight, thank God for some great reporting, we're going to get it from the major papers. We're going to know whether there's somebody screwing around with those reports, because I wonder how a 30-minute conversation gets reduced to a 10-minute conversation. But we'll see. According to prepared remarks, Vindman also told Congress today that he watched outside influencers promoting a false narrative about Ukraine, which was harmful to U.S. government policy. Additionally, Vindman was reportedly concerned by the freeze of U.S. military support to Ukraine. Documents obtained by the New York Times show that Vindman acted at the direction of his superiors to draft a memorandum in mid-August that sought to restart security aid that was being withheld from Ukraine, but Mr. Trump refused to do so. Congressman, this is pretty interesting. Here's a member of the NSC staff, a military guy in uniform, writing up a memo to restart our military assistance, the Javelin missiles, especially, I guess, the anti-tank missiles to that country in their need to fight the Russian tanks, and nothing happened.
That's exactly right. Basically, in mid-August, Vindman is trying to coordinate an interagency process. That involves the State Department, the Defense Department, and others. And basically, they're told, this aid has been frozen, and all of them are scratching their heads as to why. And they're basically saying, we better get this aid restarted ASAP, or this hold removed ASAP. So they're writing these memos. They're trying to get their secretaries to weigh in with the president and so forth. So this is very serious, and pretty much everyone at Vindman's level was equally alarmed. And so, again, it's going to be further developed with more testimony, I'm sure.
Well, today convinced me once again that the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is right on course here, doing the right thing, keeping the focus tight and sharp on this conversation, this betrayal of American interest and public trust for personal political gain. I think it's great this witness makes the case. We'll hear more, I'm sure. Thank you, U.S. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, who's on the committee, Intel Committee. Joyce Vance, great for the work you've got as expert here on prosecution of such cases. Yamiche Alcindor from PBS, and thank you, Katrina Mulligan, for your inside perspective on the atmospherics at the NSC in such situations.